Hey everyone, welcome to week 8 of our series, Good News. This week we dive into Romans 8 and realize that we are good news. While Jesus is the one who is good news for everyone and for always, our stories get to walk that into the lives of people around us. Here we go. Listen, we are going to do a little bit of an experiment here in the next few minutes. So I want you to just start to work up whatever bravery it might take for you to talk to the person next to you, okay, or around you, because we're going to do a little bit of storytelling. Jesus, the good news of Jesus is he is the headline. The good news is ultimately about him. It is him inviting us into relationship with him. So we would never live a single second without God's presence in our lives. But the way that plays out is fresh and different for every single one of us. That there are befores and afters, and the power of telling those stories is just as powerful of offering of worship to God and acknowledging what he's done as any song we could sing or anything along the way. And so we're gonna spend a little bit of time doing that for a couple of reasons I'll tell you in a minute, so work up some courage. Are you all ready? All right, start mustering up whatever courage it's gonna take. All right, so before we get there, I do want to point you out one thing you may have found on the way in. We do have this digital program that we're using now. We used to use paper. Remember paper? Those were good times. But now we use as many digital things as possible. So if you just take a picture or pull up your camera, a little website link is going to click at the top. You can click on that, and you're going to find message notes, which actually might help you in this first little bit that we're going to do. Okay, all the things that are going to show up on the screen normally and all the scriptures that we use, they show up in those message notes. If you don't have a Bible, there's a link to the really great Bible app that has all this kind of linked in together. You can read through the things that you hear and take God at his word instead of listening to some guy on a stage. And so if you find that helpful, I'd really encourage you to find your way along that. And here's a pro tip for all of you who've already done it. If you just bookmark it, it'll update automatically every week. So you can just go to your bookmark every week. You don't have to QR every week, and it's just a little bit easier. Here's what we're going to do. Every single one of us who has pointed our lives toward Jesus has a story. And while Jesus is the headline, like Mike said, all of our stories are evidence. Our stories do not rescue anyone, but all of our stories do point to the rescuer when we point our lives toward Jesus. And so what I want to offer all of us, this little experiment we're going to do, is this simple tool that you can use anywhere and everywhere you go to put your story in a really tiny container that's just full of power and invites conversation, okay? Like, all of us have stories, and if we had 2 hours to sit down over an awesome 3-course meal or something like that, we could tell all the stories. But I don't know about your life, my life doesn't often operate at that pace. My life often operates at a little bit quicker pace, passing through just alongside for a few minutes. And what if each of us could tell a powerful story of what God has done in our lives in 15 seconds? 15 seconds is pretty fast. Most of us have 15 seconds to interact with somebody or invite a conversation that might grow into something right then or at a later time. But 15 seconds could be just enough to tell a powerful story if we do it really well. Right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna coach you through it. First step is this. I want you to think of 2 to 3 words that describe your life before Jesus brought change. Now, some of you may be here and you haven't really invited Jesus to bring change in your life, and that's all right, because you're about to hear some really great stories. And this is a place that you can belong way before you believe, all right? Maybe just describe life right now as it is. But for those of us who have acknowledged or invited any movement of Jesus in our life, we've got a couple words that we could describe before, right? For me, sitting with my dad, and he gently reminded me yesterday, telling a friend what I was like when I was younger. You ever have that moment? Somebody asks your parents, what were they like when they were younger? You're like, oh, here we go. I was all about me, and he's right. And I was highly competitive. All I cared about was winning. Me and winning, that's 2 words for me before encountering Jesus in a different way. Now, some of you may have grown up around Jesus. There's not like this massive moment. It's really just kind of this slow progression. But think about a place where God has brought change in your life and think about what it was like before. 2 to 3 words. Does everybody have 2 to 3 words? Can I get a thumbs up that everybody has 2 to 3 words? Great. All right, some of you are like, I refuse to participate. You cannot make me do this. You're right, but you're gonna miss out, okay? At least do this within yourself, but it's gonna be so much better to share it with somebody else. Okay, step 2, you need 2 to 3 words that describe your life after meeting Jesus, right? What 2 to 3 words capture what God has done since then? The beauty of the good news of God is that he sets up in our lives and takes all these broken parts of us that have so much capacity for beauty and awesomeness and productivity and relationship and all those struggles along the way where we've given our best, we just can't find our way, and he just calls those to life in the best way, brings them to a better spot. 2 to 3 words before, got a lot of thumbs up. Does everybody have 2 to 3 words after? I'm really just buying you time at this point, okay? Everybody have 2 to 3 words. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do this in a couple of steps. I want you to be bold, I want you to be brave, and you don't get any explanation whatsoever, all right? You're gonna take those 2 to 3 words. You're gonna make eye contact with the person you came along with or someone around you, right? Find somebody, don't leave anybody on their own. Make eye contact like, hey, you can come over here if you want, but I'm not gonna pressure you, okay? That kind of eye contact. Don't be weird eye contact, okay? No judgment, pressure garbage, all right? But listen, make space for everybody. Don't tell a story. We're all gonna head nod that we're not gonna judge their words. Everybody give me a head nod. No judging their words. No writing your own stories because it's their story. Tell the person next to you your 2 to 3 words before Jesus right now. Just 2 to 3 words, go. If you're hanging online, you can put it right in the chat. That could be real fun. You get a whole big audience. Okay, everybody got it? Now listen. Make sure everybody gets a chance. 2 to 3 words. If you are speaking sentences, you are totally violating the process. Don't be a cheater, okay? But now tell them 2 to 3 words after. Literally 2 or 3 words, and that's all. Okay, don't lose your words. Hold on to them, text them to yourself if you need to remember, all right? But here's what we're gonna do. I don't know what car trips are like for you, but we have 4 kids ranging from ages 9 to 14, and car trips, depending on the length, can get volatile. And so somewhere along the way, when we have thought ahead, we get these little books called Mad Libs. Have you done the Mad Libs? Where there's just like, all you gotta do is put words in the blanks. You're like, oh, I need a plural verb. I need an adjective for this or whatever. And listen, the stories we come up with are pretty epic. But here's what we're gonna do. Rather than creating a funny story, we're gonna create a seamless story by just putting those words that you just came up with into some blanks. Now here's what happens when we try to tell our story of our life. Especially those of us who follow Jesus, the story always features Jesus at the center, but sometimes he gets lost in the details because we want to explain and categorize and do all these different things, and we take up all the oxygen. And our life story begins, there was a cold and rainy day when one day I was born, and then the day after that it was like this, and the day after like that, and everybody's like checked out like this, right? Our story goes forever, but we want 15 seconds of powerful, invitational transformation. And you can do it with the 6 words that you have in this Mad Lib on screen right now. You ready? All of our stories are gonna start like this. We're all gonna tell them, you're all gonna get a chance to practice. There was a time in my life when. That's how it starts. In fact, practice right now. Turn to the person next to you and say, there was a time in my life when. That's it. All right, see how easy that is? You guys are pros at this. Then what you do is you take the words, the first 2 words before Jesus, and you just put them in the blank. You might need a few connecting words, but what you don't need is 16 stories, okay? And then there's this shift in the story. So mine, remember I said, about me and competitive. There was a time in my life when I was all about me and I just wanted to win. But then I met Jesus. And now, and then we take the words from the second part. For me, the second part would be together, relationship, succeed. So now, but then I met Jesus, and now I just want to come together with people and watch both of us really rise up and become the kind of people that we want to be. And then we finished with this really powerful invitational question, letting people know that our story is over and that they can participate by asking, do you have a story like that? Some people will. If you meet a follower of Jesus, they may have a story very similar. It may take them more than 15 seconds, but now you're in the middle of a worship service at your coffee shop or your work, or you're setting up coffee later to tell the longer story of what God's been doing in our lives. Or maybe they don't. And you get to invite them into, oh man, I got good news for you. I know someone who writes these kind of stories. I can tell you 10 stories like this because God is like that. Can I tell you another one? And then now you're in a conversation, right? And what begins as a spark becomes a fire and a long conversation about Jesus. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We gotta practice because you don't do this the first time naturally. Normally our stories take forever. You're gonna get 15 seconds, and I'm gonna put a 15-second clock on the screen. And at the end of it, this massive timer it's not gonna go off because that's rude. But I'm gonna warrant 15 seconds. Here's what I want you to do. Practice in your mind for just a moment, and then we're gonna tell our stories back and forth, and this should take less than a minute. There was a time in my life when, fill in 2 words. But then Jesus showed up, and I met Jesus, and now it's like this. Do you have a story like that? And guess what? When that person says, do you have a story like that? You can say, yes, I do have a story like that because there was a time in my life when, and you can go back and forth. This takes less than a minute. Y'all ready? Let's just tell some stories. This is just a way to continue worshiping God, and I'll tell you what we'll do with all this here in just a minute. All right, now some of you are like total introverts. You've rebelled the whole time, okay? I see you. I see you. That's all right. At least tell the story within you, but I do want to encourage you, be bold. Listen in on some stories around you. Let's honor God for the things he's been doing in our lives. Y'all ready? 15-second timer is going on the clock. Who's going first? Point at the other person, make them go first. All right, here we go. Tell your story, go. All right, that's way more than 15 seconds. You ran out. If you're still going, nice try. We'll try again later. Switch. Mad lib it. Here's what we're finding. We've been doing this in some coaching gatherings. We did this in Rally Your People. As we set up next steps in months ahead, you're getting involved around here, you're gonna find your way into little tools and trainings like this. Because here's the deal. If we just had the right tools to invite people into the story that God is writing in our lives, it might create space. Instead of taking up all the space with long declarations or pointing them somewhere else, the relationships that we've established become this ground on which we can connect with others. We can celebrate God. And the next step could even be, oh man, right now, if now is before, the after I'm praying for is this. And we can pray together. We can point our lives toward Jesus together. There's so much strength in this invitation to tell stories, because here's the thing. Here's the good news of this week. And here's why we just started with a story. Good news. The good that you just described is only the beginning. It's only the beginning. If you told 100 stories, and I gotta tell you, if I sat down, I've already got 10 in my hip pocket for different ways I could tell the story of there was a time in my life when I was like this. I was trying to prove everything. I was trying to meet everyone's expectations. But then I met Jesus and realized I have nothing to prove, and I just get to serve other people in the way God calls me to. Do you have a story like that? We could go over and over and over. There was a time in my life when relationships were all transactional. I just tried to get them to do the right thing or me do the right thing. But then I met Jesus and I realized it's a journey and I get to enjoy the journey, not just the destination. Do you have a story like that? We get to compile these stories, but good news, all of that good is only the beginning. It's only a taste. It's only the surface. It's only the first layer of the everlasting gobstopper. The color changes over and over and over, lasts forever. So good. Good news, this is what God is writing. The kind of story where the good that has already come into our lives is nothing compared to the good he has in mind. And so as we invite people into our stories, as we share those stories, our good news doesn't rescue anyone, but our good news points to one who writes story after story after story after story after story after story forever, putting us back together piece by piece by piece. I told you could go to the Program in the Bible app earlier. I want to encourage you to go to Romans chapter 8. I want to show you this story that God is writing, this good news, this inclination that it's only the beginning. In Romans chapter 8, verse 23, there's this one phrase I'm going to point out before I read the bigger passage. It looks like this in verse 23. We have the Holy Spirit. God himself sets up camp in our lives and among our lives together to rebuild us, remake us, restore us, and bring all the dead parts of our lives alive in the best kind of ways. This is the good news. We've been saying it every single week, that the good news is relational. The answer is a friendship. The good news is for everyone. All of us are loved. We get called into this relationship with God, and he puts us back together. And we have this Holy Spirit within us, and he uses this phrase as just a taste, just a foretaste of future glory. Like when I'm cooking an epic meal, which I love to do on my Sabbath rest day, I love to grill up and put all these things. My kids just make their way around the island just nipping at things along the way before they get the full plate. Paul is saying, listen, what the Spirit is doing in us right now is just the beginning. The original word is actually has to do with harvest time. We don't do a lot of growing stuff around here, but try to use your imagination. Or imagine this, Gilcrease. Anybody been to Gilcrease? Love Gilcrease. It's so good, organic, locally sourced, awesome. They grow the very best apple cider donuts you have ever had in your life. So good. And they also grow some fruit sometimes. And but here's the picture of first fruits. We don't do this a lot, but I grew up in the Midwest where all things were farming. And there's this act of faith that happens every single spring. That after the weather turns just right, they fill the fields with seed underneath the ground. And you wait and you watch, and you don't control when the rain comes, and you don't control how the temperature goes. You do your best to keep what you can control going the right direction, but then suddenly things start to sprout up everywhere. But you watch it grow, and even as it grows, you're not sure it's gonna produce the amount that you need in order to make a living. You're not sure how all that's gonna unfold, and so slowly as things go along, it's like, oh, hopefully it's knee-high by the middle of July, and all these kind of things, these weird phrases that happen in the Midwest, y'all. Anyway, then comes the fall. And slowly you're testing, you're tasting along the way. Just like at Gilcrease, you see the blooms in the spring, you see the leaves come on through the summer, you see the tree thrive, and you're watching, and you're watching, and you're watching, and you're watching, and you're watching. And there's a million things that go wrong along the way, but then suddenly a few apples hit just the right place, and you take a bite, and you're like, oh, I'm so glad it has happened. And I'm so glad there's so much more to come. One off the tree at the beginning is only an inkling of so much that may come along, buckets full of harvest. This is the picture Paul uses. That no matter how much God has done in your life so far, if it's just one story of transformation, he has hundreds in mind. This is only the beginning. If it's hundreds, he has thousands in mind. And it's not just in this life, it's for all of forever. Remember, we said we don't need good news just for a few people and for now. We need a good news for everyone and for always. That's exactly what we find in Jesus. And this is what Paul is saying, that what we're experiencing is just a taste. And so the beauty of this is that we get this kind of sense of us, like when God does something awesome, when we rehearse the stories like we just did, when we tell the stories again and again and again, we can look and be like, oh, I knew you were gonna do that, God, I knew that. And then this second thing starts to rise up in us, that all the adversity and things that are yet ahead, we can say, oh, I know you will. Just like the beginning of harvest, I knew it was gonna work. I knew it, I was so hopeful it was gonna work out, and this is the beginning, this is just a taste, and it's just confidence for what's yet to come. I knew you would, and I know you will. Builds this kind of confidence, which we've been saying, right? We've been saying because of what God has done in setting things right, we can live with joy and confidence. This is why it's so important for us to tell the stories to ourselves and even to people who know the stories. It reminds us and fills us with joy and confidence of what God has done. And then you set this next to what God has said in Romans chapter 8, what Paul is telling us, that it's only the beginning. It just builds confidence and anticipation of expecting good that God has in mind for us. Like we said Wednesday night, surely goodness and love will pursue me all the days of my life, Psalm 23 says. And then on top of that, you remember what it says next? And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That what began is only the beginning, that God has good in mind and it wells up forever. And so here's the truth, is that you, followers of Jesus, are good news. We've been sharing good news week after week after week that we can share with others, but I don't want you to miss out on this. The moment you've said yes to Jesus, the moment he starts writing stories in your life, the moment you move from like leaning on yourself to hope in Jesus, the moment you go from doing your own thing to inviting the Spirit to work in your life, everywhere you show up, good news just walked in. Everywhere you go, good news just showed up. And we get to celebrate that. We get to savor that. We get to rest in that. And we get the privilege of sharing that with others. Not because we are the hope or the rescuer. We just have experienced enough from him that we can point toward him. Now, there's this thing that happens when we start to think about our story, is if you look back over the course of your story, is it all good news? Followers of Jesus, have you been totally transformed? Everything is butterflies, rainbows. You are the greatest human who has ever lived. Nod your head if that's true. Anyone? 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 Throw elbows if anyone's nodding, okay? Like a hard one. Because while we are good news, we're also a mixed bag, yeah? We're still in process. We're on the way. God is continuing to remake us. While we have been, people will often say this, we've been saved. God saved me. Yes, that's true in the sense that he'll never let you go. But it's also true that he is in the process of saving, reconstructing, rebuilding, remaking. It's all ing, in process. In fact, Paul says this in Romans 8, 17 and 18. He says this, since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. We'll inherit everything that God has in mind for us. There's a day coming when that will happen. But if we are to share in his glory, we also share in his suffering. If we look at the life of Jesus, was it all butterflies and rainbows? Absolutely not. You know why? We live in a broken world. We live in a place where things are messed up, and some of us are totally messed up. And God's making us less messed up, but it's in process. He says, listen, I just want to comfort you in the middle of this. He says, yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal in us. Do you hear it? The good has just begun. And whatever challenge or hardship we experience right now does not negate that. It doesn't mean our story means nothing. It doesn't mean the hardship that we experience right now does not mean that we are not still in process or that God doesn't have good in mind. Because now is only the beginning of the good has in mind, but it's also only the beginning. We're still waiting on the rest. We're already with God, but not yet completely the way he would want us to be or the way that he has in mind for us to be. And Paul invites us to this, into this huge picture of the reality of our world. That in the middle of God doing good and having more good in mind for us, there's also struggle. But we can't let that struggle keep us from telling our stories. And we cannot let that struggle negate what God has in mind for us. While there may be a mountain in front of us sometimes, while the struggle may seem to not have a way, that doesn't change God's character, doesn't change his love for us, and doesn't change that he is so strong that even in challenge, he can bring good. I've told this story a number of times, but there was a time in my life when I would sit on the east side of Bloomington Normal, Illinois, and beg Jesus to come back today. Because my wife was in such a deep and dark place with depression that with one kid crying upstairs and one kid crying downstairs, she'd get halfway down the stairs and could not will herself to go the second half. She hated her. She hated me. We didn't know any way forward. It didn't seem like there was any way forward. And the only time I had to myself was before the sun rose on Sunday morning on my way to work. And I would go to the east side of town and I would say, Jesus, you got to come back today because this is terrible. And I don't see any way out of this. But do you see even the beauty in that moment? I had one to hold on to. I had hope ahead. We can hold in one hand the suffering and challenge of this life, and in the other, the hope and promise that God has good in mind, that he never leaves us alone in our struggle, and that there is coming a day when the struggle will end. And this is the picture that Paul zooms out to for just a moment. It's hard to hear in the middle of struggle that it is not worth comparing to the glory God has in mind for us, that the hardship now will be so engulfed and swallowed up and diminished in the good that God has in mind, because it doesn't feel that way today. But we need that kind of hope. In the middle of the stories, as much as we celebrate the stories of transformation along the way, the ones that we're in the middle of are the hardest. Paul acknowledges this and zooms out to the biggest story. He says it in this way in verse 19. He says, listen, it's actually all of the creation. Everything that was created is waiting eagerly for the future day when God will reveal who his children really are. You see, this is the story we've been writing, those 4 circles I keep drawing. I'll probably draw them again next week. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse, but with eager hope, the creation looks forward. Like watching on the edge of the seat, trying to just see around the corner. Eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in the glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all of the creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. And we believers, listen, those of us who follow Jesus, we know this. This is what was happening on the east side of Bloomington Normal every Sunday morning. And we believers, we also groan. We long. We're like, can it just be the way it's supposed to be? The answer is one day it will be, but we also groan, even though we have the Holy Spirit within us as a foretaste, a promise, just a little bit that says good has come and more is on the way. For we long for our bodies to be released from sin and suffering. And we too wait with eager hope for the day when God will give us our full rights as adopted children, including the new bodies he has promised us. God has promised so much good. There's a day coming when the struggle against health won't be anymore, when cancer will no longer exist, when depression won't be a reality, when division and estrangement from those we love the most won't be an issue. There's a day coming when all will be set right. And we have so much hope in that. We can, if we know there's an end, we can just keep going. This is what Paul is saying over and over, like, listen, God has good in mind. And here's the beauty of following Jesus, is between here and there, piece by piece by piece by piece, he puts things back together. We get to journey with him, counting on the day when he'll finish it fully and finally. But I just want to remind you, the good that we're experiencing right now, as good as it is, as much as we can celebrate, it's just a taste. It's only the beginning. But it's a promise. Like the first fruits of a harvest, like the first apple on the tree, it's only the beginning. There's more to come. God's story is that he's up to nothing short of redeeming all of creation. And when we say yes to him, we find ourselves caught up in this. Each of us, one little story of evidence, one transformation story after another of God saying, yep, I'm putting things right. I'm setting things right. I'm turning things right side up. I'm calling people back together over and over. We get to be beacons of hope, good news everywhere we go. You see, we are the evidence that good has come and that more is coming. I don't know what you read in the news, and I don't know what you see across people's social media feed, but all I see in headline after headline is, oh, it's getting worse, getting worse. Look out, we got to do this because it's going to get worse. Oh my goodness, we should be afraid of this, over and over and over. You know what this world needs? People show up, say, look what God has done, and he has more in mind. There is good in me, and there is good ahead, and there's good for you if you'll point your life toward Jesus. Let's follow in his way. Whatever may happen in systems and organizations around us, every single one of us can show up every place we go as the good news that God is inviting us to be. You see, the good news that God is writing is not just for us, it's through us into others. We get caught up into a much larger story with no obligation for any one of us to rescue anyone, but every single one of us with the opportunity to show up as good news. In fact, in Romans 10:13, he says this reminder, this hope that we have that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, will be rescued, will be put back together, piece by piece by piece, good now and good forever. Can I get a head nod on that? Yeah? Some of us are in that everyone. But we're also surrounded by everyone. There are all kinds of everyone's around us that we love it when we read Romans chapter 1 and realize there's good news for everyone. Everyone is loved. Everyone is called to believe. Everyone is invited to follow in Jesus' way. And we love Romans chapter 2 where it says, oh man, we all have this big problem, but good news, there's a solution. We love Romans 4 where we realize it's not all on us. God's got us. He does the heavy lifting. Or Romans 5 where it's not our actions or our earning that sets us right. It's God who sets us right. Or Romans chapter 7 that when we can all say the struggle is real. Can I get a head nod? The struggle is real. The answer is a friend, Romans 7 says. In Romans 6, we find out that we get called into this story that we don't owe sin anything. In Romans 8, where the Spirit calls us to life, where God invites us into His family, among His family, His Spirit moves in. But here's the truth. There's everyone's all around us who don't know any of that. They don't know any of it. And so all they got to go on is the bad news, hope in some organization, hope in some kind of success, hope in some political party, hope in some kind of anything else, and it just won't hold. Which is why the very next thing Paul says is this: while everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved, he asks a really powerful question. Do you remember what it is? He says, how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them about him? And how? How can anyone go and tell them without being sent? Guess what's happening right now? You're being sent. Jesus said, as the Father has sent me, so I send you. 15 seconds at a time. One transformation at a time. One delivery of good news after another with Jesus at the center of the story. That's why the scriptures say, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. Paul asks the question in reverse order, but here's the marching orders in our way. First, we're sent. Then we speak. Then they hear. They have a chance to believe. We're being sent. The question is, will you speak? God has written good news into every single one of our stories, and good news for all of us. It's only the beginning. But now we become the people who are sent to speak that good news and say there is good news, it's for everyone, and it's only the beginning. God has so much good in mind. But if we never speak, if we never step into people's lives with good news pointing at the one who can rescue, not us, not an organization, not a church, but Jesus himself. When I met Jesus, that's when things changed. He's the one who brings change. He is the one who is hope. And so we're sent and we speak and they hear, and we don't get to decide whether they believe or not. Like putting seeds in the ground, we don't get to decide if they grow. We don't get to decide when the rain arrives. We don't get to decide if they sprout or ever bear fruit. All we get to do is plant and water, plant and water, plant and water. But if we don't, nothing grows. As much as I appreciate this sentiment that one person once said that, listen, go everywhere and preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words. It will take words. His point was live a life that earns the opportunity to speak words. But it will take words. If we never speak of Jesus, if we never tell the stories of the good God has in life, why would they ever trust Jesus? How will a world ever know God is good unless his people show up as good with good news? And so listen, we need to pray for bravery. We need to train ourselves well. We need 15-second story after 15-second story with a powerful question at the end that invites conversation. No, we don't get to control outcomes, but we do get to control whether people hear. An invitational, non-judgmental, non-preachy message that just says, I just want you to know, there was a time when things were a mess. And the difference came when I met Jesus, and now it's more and more like this. Do you have a story like that? Well, no, I don't. Or yeah, I guess the biggest change in my life has come about like this, and now we get to step in and we're in a conversation, a back and forth conversation to say, listen, there's good news. And it's only the beginning. I can tell you 25 stories, but I can tell you 25 stories God's still writing. They don't need people to show up perfect. They don't need trite answers. What people need is hope. What they need is good news. And so be sent. You are. and speak, will you? So that people might have a chance to hear and believe. Some might say, listen, I don't know where to share my transformation story. Listen, just follow your feet. Wherever you find yourself, you are good news. The question is, will anyone else know it? Will we behave in a way that creates opportunity? Will we pray powerfully that God would open doors and align conversations, put us in the right place with people, and give us just what we need at the right moment? He promised this to his followers. Hey, listen, the Spirit will teach you what to say. Doesn't hurt to be ready with 15 seconds. Some of you might say, listen, I don't know if it's like risky. Yeah, of course it is. It's exciting. It's awesome. Like this guy in my group, he's living an adventure all the time, looking for chances right now to speak good news into the life of other people. We don't need to control outcomes, not our job. We just get to choose how we show up. Will we show up with something to say? Good news and the confidence that more is on the way. Will it be costly? Probably. But don't forget that the suffering we endure now is nothing compared to the glory that will be revealed in us. The small risks, the little fears, we need God's help. We need to pray and ask for his help to overcome those, because on the other side of great conversations, the other side of a story of transformation, on the other side of an invitation to talk about life change, are people coming alive in Jesus. And I don't know a single Christian who would trade that for anything. The question is, who else will we come? Who else will find their way if we're not people who are speaking boldly? So let me just ask you, take just a moment, and I want you to think, and I want you to ask God, God, would you call to mind people ahead in my week who I could share a 15-second powerful story with? Take just a moment, ask God. God, where are places I will be this week? To say that good has come and more is on the way. And let me just ask you, what could you commit to in the next 47 hours to begin a week of being good news? What could you do? What kind of time could you set aside to continue praying what we just began? How might you change the beginning of your day asking God for chances to share a 15-second story and ask a powerful question? Where could you commit to? Who did God call to mind and say, God, I will not fail to show up in that person's world, hoping you'll give me a chance to share a story of transformation in their life? There's something powerful about saying to ourselves and even someone around us, I'm going to do this in the next 47 hours. Not because it all needs to happen by then, but it gets us moving. Think for just a moment, what will you do in the next 47 hours to be those who are sent to speak so that people can hear and believe? I mean, no big deal. It's just all of creation waiting on the edge of its seat for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed. It's just all that God loves and spoke into existence waiting to come alive in Jesus. You will not see a single person this week who cannot come alive in Jesus if they just heard some good news. The question is, how will we show up? So here we go. In the days ahead, let's be people who invite people into the story of Jesus by sharing the story that God's been writing in our lives, recognizing that God is up to something, not just now, but for forever. If there's any way we can support you along the way, I want to encourage you, head over to canyonridge.org. You'll find everything you need to get connected, start a group, find out answers to any of the questions that you might have, as well as to reach out to our staff. Listen, don't forget to share this with a friend, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you soon.